Well, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday 10th of July 2023. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's Planning Authority meeting, and joining me here in Council Chambers this afternoon is Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Josh Cockshut and Alderman Russell Yaxley, fellow members of our Planning Authority. Also joining us are a number of council staff who are going to present to us this afternoon, so welcome to you all and welcome to members of the public joining us in Chambers this afternoon, and to those of you joining us online for our live stream. I start by acknowledging the Palawa people, Tasmanian Aboriginal people, as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, this island, Lutruwita, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. The Planning Authority the Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, and the Planning Authority has the full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Glenorchy City Council. Our meeting procedures this afternoon are pretty straightforward. Our planning officer will present their assessment and recommendation and then answer any questions of Planning Authority members. I'll then invite the applicant, if they are present, and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. Our speakers who would wish to present to the authority by making representation will be limited to 5 minutes of speaking time. I may then ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised by either the applicant or representatives. The planning authority will then discuss the application and the statutory planning applications. The planning authority decides the application and the senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. And for planning scheme amendment decisions, the strategic planner will explain the decisions being made by the planning authority and then the process through to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. When deciding an application, the Glenorchy Planning Authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, to consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are fairly straightforward. Please comply with any directions given by myself as chairperson, and it's important that we respect other people's views and their right to have their say. So, done the Planning Authority declaration, item 1 on our agenda. Item 2 is apologies, leave of absence. There are no apologies this afternoon, no leave of absences. Item 3 is pecuniary interests. Do any Planning Authority members or staff have any pecuniary interests today? Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 15th of May, not 13th, 15th of May 2023 be confirmed? Moved Alderman Dunsby, seconded Alderman Cockshut. Any discussion? No. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Item 5 is proposed use and development, multiple dwellings, 13U. One lot subdivision and demolition at 72 Main Road, Claremont and 74 Main Road, Claremont. And our planning officer is Sylvia presenting to us today on this one. Yes. Sylvia's joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm joining from home. So the application is for 13 units to be constructed, demolition of 1 dwelling and 4 outbuildings. The reconfiguration of 2 lots and also some works within council land for a new manhole and for a bin pad. The proposal is to be done in 4 stages. So the first slide will show us the subject site on the left-hand side. So the site is made up of 2 lots, sort of L-shaped, and contains, well, each lot was containing a single dwelling and some outbuildings. The second slide on the right is showing the zoning map. So the zone of the site is the inner residential zone. That's the burgundy zone, and all the land surrounding the site is also within the inner residential zone. You notice the blue zone, that's the Claremont shopping area within the business zone. The use class is residential for multiple units, which is a permitted use within the inner residential zone. Can we have the next slide, please? So the next slide, this is showing us the subdivision. So the subdivision is not actually creating any new lots, but it's substantially altering the size and the shape of the existing lots. So it's a reconfiguration of lots. So the subdivision will cut off the existing house, which is to be retained at 72 Main Road, and would add most of the backyard to the main site, which is at 74 Main Road. So the smaller lot will be 427 square meters and the larger lot 2,971 square meters. We have the next slide, please. So this slide shows the site layout. So it's proposed to have 6 single-story dwellings along the northern boundary and another single-story dwelling along the eastern boundary behind the existing dwelling. The other 3 buildings along the western boundary, they would be double-story and they would contain 2 units each. And you can see the internal driveway as well, and each one of the dwellings would have 2 car parking spaces and there'd be visitor spaces as well. Next slide, please. So the top row of the dwellings will be, if you were standing along the internal drive and looking along the northern boundary. So that's the elevations there, and the second row down is what would be seen if you were on the other side of the fence along the northern boundary, looking at the first 6 units plus unit 7 and 8, which are in the double-story building. Next slide, please. This shows the other 2 buildings, which have 2 units in each one of them that are along on the western boundary. Those units also have a balcony on the second floor and have the main living spaces on the second floor. You notice the higher windows that will be facing the western boundary, so that means that they can go closer than 4 meters to the western boundary because the windows are up high there. Next slide, please. So this is at the end of the service road, which comes off Main Road. That's the entrance to the site, and sort of between the mesh fence, you can see the fence along the northern boundary and a big chunk of the site. And next slide, please. This is looking back towards Main Road. So this is like standing in front of the fence at the entry to the site, looking back to Main Road. So that's the service road, so it's quite wide. It does have a little bit of an embankment towards Main Road. The house that you can see is the house that's going to be retained on the smaller lot, and it will have a bin pad in 2.2 meters away from the fence, similar to what you would have if you had a footpath. Next slide, please. So the discretions are relating to the private open space. So not all units have private open space that has a 4-meter width. They're required to have 24 square meters. All of the units have a lot more than 24 square meters of private outdoor space, but in places the private outdoor space is 3 meters wide instead of 4 meters wide, and that's causing the discretion. It's also noted that 4 of the units on the western side, they also have a balcony in addition to their private outdoor space because they don't have direct access to the private outdoor space, while all the other units, they have a sliding door from the living area that directly adjoins private outdoor space. So because each one of the units has quite a lot more than 24 square meters of private outdoor space, and it's considered that 3 meters is a usable width, it was considered that that would be acceptable and will comply with the performance criteria. The next discretion is about motorcycle parking. They're supposed to have one motorcycle parking space. However, the development engineer says that there will be room to accommodate that within the properties, so that would not cause an issue. The next discretion is about pedestrian access for the internal road. Again, that was assessed by the engineers and was considered to be acceptable, that the speed that the vehicle's travelling at and the width of the internal road would be sufficient to provide safe movement for pedestrians. Traffic generation was also assessed, so that will be an increase in traffic, obviously, with that many units. The applicant had to submit the traffic impact assessment, which was assessed by the traffic engineer, and it was found that the efficiency and the safety of main road would not be adversely affected by the additional traffic that will be generated by the units. Next slide, please. So the application was advertised in accordance with statutory requirements. We received 3 representations, 2 of them from the same household. The concern was height. The representatives felt that the proposed development was not in keeping with the mainly single-storey development in the area, and also that it would take away their view and that it may cause overshadowing. The planning scheme requires that dwellings would have to be within a building envelope. It's normally like as high as they go, as further they have to be away from the boundary. But the highest that they could go would be 9.5 meters. However, none of the units is that high. The 6.8 is the highest one of the units. So because they comply with that, under the planning scheme, the council can't consider any amenity impacts caused by the height of the units. Also, loss of privacy was an issue that was raised. Again, the planning scheme actually does look at privacy. So normally 2nd-storey windows have to be 4 meters from the back boundary and 3 meters from the side boundary to not adversely impact on privacy. That's not to say that they can't overlook some of the neighbouring property. However, it's determined that that is acceptable under the planning scheme. In particular, Unit 7 and 8, people were concerned about the loss of privacy. That unit would have to be 3 meters, or the upstairs windows would have to be 3 meters away from the boundary. But in fact, they're over 5 meters away from the boundary. So they actually comply with the privacy provisions. Another issue that was raised was the loss of green space. It is noted that this development is within the inner residential zone that allows for the densest development within all of the zones. There are, however, standards that relate to site coverage. So maximum site coverage would be 65%, and this development is way below 65% in terms of site coverage. Also, total amount of outdoor space that's that is together with the private outdoor space is 40 square meters, and each unit has more than that. So the proposal complies in terms of green space. Another issue was raised was heritage. So this area, well, the dwelling it's already demolished. That's demolished. It's not heritage listed, and also the dwelling on the land to be subdivided is not heritage listed. So the site is not affected by heritage provisions. Another issue was raised was the demolition of a shed on the boundary of 70 Main Road. At the moment, that shed has got a wall that's partly where normally the fence will go, and so the neighbours are concerned that there be a gap if the shed comes down. And also that because the shed is higher than any fence that might replace the shed, that might not protect the tree that's on their site. So the planning scheme does not require people putting up fences, but it is expected that there probably will be a replacement fence for where the shed is at the moment. But demolition is actually permitted under the planning scheme, so the council could not prevent the shed to be demolished if it's not heritage listed. Another concern was raised is the amenity impacts from the building works. Building works are usually restricted in terms of operating hours under the building permit, which that process will come after planning. So there certainly won't be any nighttime building works. So it'll be during daytime. And my understanding is that it'll be only during work days. So that will be regulated. Then the other issues raised were traffic and parking. Again, the engineers had a look at that, and the proposal is satisfactory, provides the required amount of car parking spaces that they need to have. Another concern was the capacity of infrastructure. They will have to upgrade some of the infrastructure, and also the proposal will be satisfactory in regards to that. And the last issue was waste management. They were considered about all the bins that will be put out on bin day on the service road. It's noted that they will be having shared bins, and the bins will be on site during the week. There's a bin enclosure, and there will be 13 bins and not 26 because they'll be having shared bins, and there will be a bin pad in the service road where they will be for the collection day. So the planning scheme does actually provide for a lot of the things that the people were concerned about. However, the proposal complies with most of the standards. Most of the issues that were raised are covered by the scheme. The only issues raised by the representatives relying on performance criteria were footpaths and traffic generation, but also those issues were found satisfactory by the engineers. Then I've only got one more thing. Could we have the next slide, please? The applicant requested that condition 5 be changed. And so I'm recommending a replacement condition. So first we require a screen to go up within 1 meter of the units that are joining neighbouring car parking spaces. However, the applicant is actually providing for frosted glass, and also the windows that are joining the car parking spaces, they're 1.5 metres off the ground. And so the frosted glass actually complies with the acceptable solution. So we can actually not require the screen to be put up. So I'm recommending that the condition be changed, that the windows on the west elevation of units 1 to 6 adjacent to neighbouring parking must have fixed obscure glazing extending to a height of not less than 1.7 metres above floor level. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive overview. Sylvia, do any planning authority members have any questions for Sylvia at this stage?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Matt. My question would be just around the parking arrangement in terms of the service road. So I think in the report it mentions that there's parking that's available on the eastern side, and then there's pedestrian access that's satisfactory. I just wanted to just get that clarified that we are comfortable with that on the service road, not necessarily in the development as such, but
Service road?
yeah.
Emily, would that be?
I think
Oh, sorry, Sylvia, shall I ask you?
the engineer might be best to answer that.
Thank you, Emily. Please come forward to the seat.
So the traffic impact assessment looked at the impacts. the service road is about 5.5 metres wide, with half a metre on either side of sort of verge area there. So the sill width is wide enough for 2 cars to park, and pedestrians will potentially use the western side, not the eastern side, so where the embankment is, to walk along as well. It's also a straight section, so sight lines are reasonably good as well. In regards to parking from the development, under the planning scheme, they are providing adequate parking. So there's 2 car parking spots per unit, plus another 4 visitor parks. Under the planning scheme, they only require 3 visitor parking spaces. So the traffic impact assessment said there shouldn't be any impact on that service road with parking there.
And so, just another question, so there will be a footpath that will run up this?
No, there's no footpath. It's currently as it is at the moment, apart from an area outside the frontage of the house that's going to be maintained, where bins will be placed. But when the bins aren't there, it will be an informal footpath just in that first section.
Yep, that's great. And just another question, just regarding the embankment. So obviously with the road at the moment, it's obviously a clear. There's no guardrail and all that infrastructure. Is that part of the plan to have that input put in, or is it?
No, so that was asked as well as further information as well for the traffic report to assess that. Because they've got adequate parking within their site, they're saying they won't have any vehicles parking on the service road. So therefore, they're self-contained. In regards to a guardrail, that's not required because their vehicles come straight out.
Right.
So you have a guardrail when, it's a 90-degree bend there. And as I said, pedestrians are proposed to use the western side, so therefore a pedestrian fence isn't proposed either. There could possibly be some guideposts there, but the development sort of said that it is adequate as it is.
As it is. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just to add to that question, because I was interested in the same thing, the verge itself, what's that going to be? Is it just grass, or is it going to be?
So on the service road,
The verge, what's going to be on that verge?
well, it's what it is currently at the moment.
Can we go back to the slide that shows that photo, please?
So that service road is not changing.
The service road.
I did, however, put a condition on the permit though, because there will be a lot of trucks and heavy vehicles going in there, and that service road may be damaged. So if it is, then the developer will need to fix that.
So that's our service road?
Yes, that's within the road reservation.
Yes.
So it's
So we've got to maintain that
yes.
with the extra traffic and the verge. What condition are we going to keep that verge in if that's going to be a footpath for 15 or 30?
Well, the traffic impact and the footpath would be on the other side away from that bridge area, so that there's no changes proposed to that bridge area.
Okay. And I see there's 2 parking spots per unit.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Good. For once.
Meets the acceptable solution.
Yeah.
Exceeds it by one.
Yeah. Exceeds by half, doesn't it? Or
1, I think.
1.5 per unit it's supposed to have. So
No, under the planning scheme it is 2.
it is 2.
But often they might address the performance criteria and provide less.
We must have had a lot of people ask for less than
We
it's
have.
stuck in my head. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsbury.
Thank you. I'm looking at the condition of the road there. Now, we've identified that it is our road, but as you can see, there's a different standard on that road. Is council's responsibility for the road end at that line where it is, and this bit that's just sort of gravel, is that bit of road to be brought up to the same standard? Is that our responsibility as council? Is that the developer's responsibility?
So our boundary is, if you look on the second picture where that wooden fence is there, so that's where the boundary is. I imagine the developer, as I said beforehand, will have lots of trucks going in there, and that road will potentially get damaged, and they will be required to fix that.
So is that a condition that they will fix it, or are we just expecting them to? Should that be a condition that we expect? This is my question, if you come out of your unit, you're presented with that and then a bit of road, it's not particularly good. I see this road falling apart very quickly with the building, and we've seen in the picture there's a bus park there, so vehicles would be going across the edge. I can see the edge of the road being destroyed as well. I'm wondering why we haven't put more conditions potentially on the developer to put in a proper road and maybe curb channel and somewhere for them to work as well. So just an understanding of why they haven't had that, for the area as well.
As I said, so the width is considered adequate, and I suppose you're sort of more about the condition of that access road. I suppose this is because it's like a service road that comes off. It was coming onto a normal road. It would still be council's responsibility to maintain that road.
Condition 10 is that any damage to council's assets, including services, footpaths, driveway crossings and nature strips, must be promptly reported and then repaired to the requirements of council's development engineer at the developer's cost.
Or what?
They're in breach of the permit.
It's after the fact, isn't it?
I mean, if we just look at that photo there now, any vehicles coming out and going through with the bus park there, they're going to be over onto the verge of, at the edge of the road, and that's going to break down fairly quickly.
Yeah, Director?
Under the Local Government Highways Act, council has the ability to actually on charge any repairs that has to undertake through damages that we can attribute to developments or transport trucks. So we actually have that ability under the Act to just recharge whoever's caused the damage, and otherwise we can actually do the work ourselves and then reclaim the cost from the person that caused the damage.
And how long does that provision last? The developers obviously on sell and move on. How long does that provision last that we can chase the developers for that?
It's indefinite.
Indefinite?
Well, the statute of limitations is 6 years, so as long as we invoice within that 6-year period.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Just
Alderman Jackson.
through you, just another question just around Alderman Dunsby's, just so the condition of the road has to be brought up to that level, or does it need to be brought up back up? If there's damage, does it have to be serviced back up to that level, or does it need to be I guess what level does it need to come back up to?
I would expect it would be as it was.
Right.
We couldn't possibly require them to better it.
No, okay.
Mayor, that's correct. So it would depend on the type of damage, but if the asphalt pavement was cracked or damaged, we'd expect that to be cut out and new pieces of asphalt put in. We'd accept that it's not a complete overlay, but any damaged area would need to be brought back to that standard.
Yep, okay.
Can you just go back one more slide, please? Is there another photo of the big? So that's the driveway entrance there. That's what you're talking about there. So one would expect in trying to market cell units, they'd be probably intending to improve that part of the development anyway.
Just on the plan, it does show new bitumen driveway
Right.
that goes partly out.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
right.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would expect that they would.
Yeah, it's just got a differential in
Yeah.
between it's asphalt, that's the
Yeah.
concern.
Thank you, Grace. Any further questions? Alderman Dunn?
Yeah, still continuing. So just with the waste management, maybe if we just sort of an idea on this picture, so where would the bins be? Will they still be sort of the other side of the where that fence is now, or this side? And is there scope for the removal vehicle to go in and pick up the bins and turn around and come back out again? What's the expectation there?
I think the bin pad was going to be outside the house, out the front there, is that right? So out the front of that fence. Is that
Just
right?
for clarity, so the bin collection area is outside the front of the property, the existing building there, the existing house, but there is an internal bin storage area within the property. So the bins will be stored centrally within the property during the week, and there'll be a shared bin collection service that will collect from the roadway just to the left of that photo up there on the left-hand side. And because that's actually currently a grass verge, the developer will be required to construct a concrete pad there where the bins will be placed for collection once a week.
Thank you. So my further question is, these are obviously shared bins, they're going to be the larger bins. Responsibility will be on the residents to put them out and put them back.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Remembering footpaths and traffic generation are the only discretions here. Okay, we do have some representatives here, I believe, but not the applicant. Thank you, Emily.
I'm the owner,
Oh, you're the owner?
not the applicant.
Oh, sorry. The
They
owner?
can speak first if they
Okay.
want.
Would you like to address the authority this afternoon?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Please just state your name.
Jonathan Lynch.
Sure, have a seat. Thank you. Are you a neighbouring property?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
So we're on the western side of the property, so where the two-storey units are going on the western side of the, we've got 7 and 8, which is our main issue, is 6.8 metres. And understand that that's within the code, but it's it could be done better, and it's massive impact on our yard. The reply that was in the notes from the agenda was that they were looking at house 15, but we're house 11, which is on the western side. They were looking on the northern side for the shadowing. So the shadowing is actually morning sun. It will be affecting our backyard and outdoor area as well. So that's the first sort of problem. But just the size of the unit. I mean, if you look at the wall behind us here, that's about 5 metres. So there's a 6.8 metre wall dikes up, a bit over a metre higher than what we're looking at there, and about the same width. That's what we'll be looking at from our house. And there's no windows, there's nothing, it's just a solid wall. And it just basically takes away any sunlight and anything that we can see behind it. Now, currently, if it was a single-storey dwelling, there'd be no issue. And looking at the plan here, we've got 13, which is in the right-hand corner behind the existing house. That's a single-storey dwelling. Like, I don't see why they couldn't swap those two around between 7 and 8 up in the top left down to where 13 is, and have all single-storey dwellings all down the one side of the fence on the northern side. And that would be a lot more neighbour-friendly, because at the moment it's affecting 3 properties. So the northern one, which is 15, and then in the top left corner there'd be 13, and us on the western side at 11. So yeah, it's a big impact on the neighbourhood, which it just seems to me it's just not designed to look after the neighbouring properties. I guess, yeah, like the other points we had was, like it's 2.5 metres, like above the fence is the acceptable standard, but like obviously if you're up, if you've got a second-storey dwelling looking down, you're going to have a fair bit of impact with, people using those areas, looking into other people's backyards, and it's quite disruptive, having that right on your back door. And yeah, the other thing as well I've got is the landscaping around it. Like, it's not actually set up to try and disrupt any of that visual impact. And you could have something like, advanced trees or bamboo screening or something like that, to grow up along the fence line to try and break that up a little bit. But just doesn't seem to have been taken into consideration. All the landscaping we've got is a few lemon trees and shrubs going around the fence, which isn't really going to make much difference to the area at all. So, anything to add to that?
No, we've got a lot of families in the area. We all have our backyards, and, we all use them, and it's really going to impact people's living. And it will be a real shame to see a 2-storey building go in that space.
The thing, so with all the neighbouring properties, they're all single-storey dwellings. Like, to have, it could be done better, and to have that just, plonked straight in the middle, it hasn't really sort of had any consideration to the neighbours at all.
Thank
Can
you.
just ask a question? What street are you guys on, sorry?
Into Lange Place.
Delaney's Place.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you making the time to come along and share your views with us this afternoon. Sylvia, do you have any comments in response to the issues raised here, particularly around sunlight and the landscaping, perhaps?
Yes, just to say again that it's only when there's a discretion that we can ask for shadow diagrams and can consider that. However, normally 3 hours is the minimum of sunlight that they're got to retain if there were a discretion, for example. But being on the northern side or or slightly to the northwest, I don't believe that they will be significantly impacted by overshadowing. But having said that, again, like in terms of the height, there's nothing that we can do if they're actually compliant with the standard. It's only when there's a discretion that we might be able to negotiate with them, maybe to step up the dwelling or do something like that to reduce the impact. The other thing too, if they did swap it with Unit 13, the problem would have been they wouldn't have been able to put the visitor spaces in there, because they would have then had to have a bigger setback from the adjoining property there. So that would interfere with the visitor spaces if they were to swap the 2 units. Not that we can require that, but just in terms of maybe, having a different kind of development. Again, too, also the landscaping. It'd be nice if we could require the landscaping, but there's nothing under the planning scheme where we can require that landscaping. So we can only hope that the people who move in there, that they will do something in terms of that. So that's all I can say about those issues, that the planning scheme does cover it. I believe it will have an impact on the neighbours. However, it's not considered unreasonable because it's within the development standards. So we cannot refuse it or get them to change it if they actually comply with a particular standard that they do in regards to height and privacy.
Thank you.
Sylvia, your reply sort of is talking about the north side. We're actually on the west side, and we're actually only 3 metres. That's actually only 3 metres from the boundary, not 5 metres from the boundary. So from the wall to Stephen here, away, we've got a 6 metre wall. So it is creating quite a significant amount of shading in our backyard.
So west to southwest, that you're looking at 15, we're on 11 below 13 there, so it's quite a difference in the shadowing. You've got the easterly morning sun coming up, it's directly at us, the shadow, so it doesn't seem to be taken in on the notes.
The backyard for quite.
Silver, again, is that something that we haven't been able to consider because the setback is not discretionary?
No, the setback's not discretionary. Normally, like the wall is actually higher. The 6.8 is not. That's at the gable, at the top of the gable. That's not where the wall is. So they do comply with the building envelope. On the slides where it shows the elevations, it does actually show the building envelope, and the buildings are within, on the top left-hand corner, you can see the double-storey building and the western side wall, and you can see a dotted line. That's the building envelope, and except for the gables, they're within the building envelope. The gables are allowed to be outside the building envelope. And not the gables, sorry, the eaves, sorry, the eaves are allowed outside the building envelope.
Right.
Just going back to, we were saying the 13 wouldn't go because of the visitor car parks. If you go back to the other slide, the aerial view of the property there, if you look at the 2 properties, I know I used the plans on the, not the aerial, the close-up showing the actual development, all the units. Yeah, so with that one, so using a scale ruler, the 7 and 8, if you overlay that on top of 13, it actually is the same size, but going out towards where the back stairs are coming down on 13, that's where the 8 and 9 fit inside that. So I don't see where it's affecting the car parking area, because it does actually fit in that size block.
Oh, you mean the number 13 if the units were swapped over?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would have to be further away from the southern boundary, which then, so they have visitor spaces on the northern side of Unit 13.
Yeah.
So if they had to be further away from the southern boundary because they were double-storey, because a single-storey dwelling has a lesser setback than a double-storey dwelling, then that would then that would make the visitor spaces shorter, or they would then come into the driveway, so there wouldn't be enough room. But besides the point, if they comply with the building envelope, we can't make them swap it over anyway. But I was just trying to explain that's probably, why they've chosen that layout.
Like for me, like I can see that the 7 and 8 is actually a narrower building, so the backyard area on the southern side will be quite a bit larger. So I think that would still fit in the footprint there. I don't think that's the issue. Obviously, they've put this design forward. I just think the planning of the design is not really thinking about the neighbouring. That's my whole point. It hasn't really taken into consideration the neighbours. It'd be a lot better design if all the northern properties were all single story, and then it wouldn't be affecting anyone.
All right. Thank you. We certainly have noted your concerns, and as I say, I appreciate you taking the time to come in. And if you just return to your seats, we do have the owner, Mr. Moore, here. Would you like to address the authority, Mr. Moore?
Sorry, let Tony wants to talk first.
Oh, sorry.
Can Tony talk? Is the another representative?
Tony, you're another representative.
I did on the phone to Sylvia, but all I wanted to say was that I live at 15 Lance Place, which overlooks 7 and 8, going to look straight into my backyard with 4 windows. I've come to an agreement with Drew, the builder, that the 4 windows will be frosted to a height and they will be fixed, except for the top part, the second part, the top part that opens to them. We've come to a verbal agreement. I've got most of it in emails that Drew is prepared to do, which I don't have a problem with because it'll cut the view out from looking into the bedrooms and looking straight into my backyard.
Okay, wonderful. We love it when people come to these agreements, don't we?
But we can't get, it's not passed. The problem that I had, as I said to Drew, was that if those windows happen to be broken or anything, I would prefer if it was mandatory that they be replaced with a frosted window.
I think once that is a condition of a development, that's a condition. If the window is replaced in the future, that condition remains.
Right.
So yeah, that's ongoing. And I think the condition that Sylvia presented to us covers off on exactly what you've agreed there.
I think that condition was just for the west side facing single floor windows. There was nothing mentioned about the second story on the north face.
Is that right, Sylvia?
Yes, they were on that condition was for the single-story units that are adjacent to car parking areas, that they have to have the high windows.
Okay.
No, we would have to insert an additional condition if we're wanting to have a condition that requires frosted windows.
Okay, sure. Mr. Moore, would you like to address the authority? Thank you.
Can we get that added as a condition for the permit?
Sure. Sylvia, is it possible to add that in? Would that be still make part of condition 5?
Not really, because the condition 5 is addressing a different kind of an issue. It's addressing the amenity impacts from the adjoining car park and not for privacy reasons. So we could maybe have the wording similar. Let's see, the windows on the north elevation of units 7 and 8 must have obscure glazing extending to a height of 1.7 meters above floor level. We could have it like that.
Yep, perfect, thank you.
You'd be happy with that?
Yep.
Yep. Grace, are you able to just note that down for us and make sure we're clear on that wording, if that's something we're going to be considering? Thank you.
So I just want to address the Representative 1's concerns about the loss of sunlight. I don't believe that is an issue. Whilst units 7 and 8 are on the eastern side of his property, they're only 6 metres wide. So yes, they may lose a tiny bit of their morning sun, but they never had that morning sun until we stripped the land of all the trees and everything else that was hanging over there. He also has a shed built, or 2 sheds built on the back fence, which are at the moment sitting above the fence. The fence is 2.1 metres and the sheds are both be clear of the fence by at least 1 metre high. So he's already got 2 big sheds there that are 4 metres from high ground level, so we're only adding another 2 metres or 2.5 metres for our roof heights. So we're not actually blocking any more of his sunlight than what he already loses. We would have been happy to landscape that boundary, but there's a Taswater sewer main that runs right through on his side of the property, and we can't plant trees within 2 metres of that sewer main for fear of trees eating into the pipes and blocking them up. So we're unable to landscape to an extent that he would like. We're more than happy to put some shrubs and stuff there, but we can't put anything there that's going to grow, 5 to 6 metres high. We're just not allowed to do it. And we've also chosen lightweight materials for the top story in order to try and lighten the feel of the development so that it's not overpowering to all the neighbours. And we have worked with other neighbours, as Tony just said. We've worked with him this week last week to try and come to an agreement on what he wanted, which is fair and reasonable, and we've certainly agreed to obscure the glass for him. We don't believe we're putting any further any other neighbours in a position they don't want to be in. We're just trying to build houses. We all know that there's a housing crisis, and we just want to get these ones built so we can accommodate some more people.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anything further to add, Sylvia? Are you happy for us to move on?
No, I'm happy with that.
Okay.
No, that's all good.
Okay, well, we do have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 72 Main Road, Claremont and 74 Main Road, Claremont, subject to 29 conditions now that we've added an additional one in relation to frosting of windows, which Grace has worded for us, or is wording for us, and noting that condition 5 will be as reads on the screen there.
One question. You also talked about them being fixed windows. Is that something?
Fixed to a height of 1.7 metres. The top part will still be in awning as it's shown on the plan.
And it was units 8 and
7
9.
and 8.
7 and 8.
Thank you. So we're adding in a condition that the second story windows on the north elevation of units 7 and 8 are to have obscure glazing and fixed to 1.7 metres above floor level. You satisfied with that, Sylvia?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. So that being the conditions, do I have someone to move that recommendation as a motion? Moved Alderman King, seconded Alderman Cockshott. Alderman King.
Stage President. Look, I appreciate the concerns of the nearby residents, we really do, but we are locked into being a planning authority, and as the Mayor suggested before, I think, and Sylvia suggested, the discretions are such that they're allowable, and I can't see another reason to stop this going ahead, so I would have to support it.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion?
No, just echo Alderman King's sentiment. I think we've had a good discussion from around the table and the representatives and the developer, so good that we can come to an arrangement. Obviously, we've got to meet these 29 conditions, so I'm happy to support it, and hopefully, go from there.
Thank you, Alderman Cockshott. Anything further? No, I too empathise totally with you, Mr. and Mrs. Lynch. Development obviously does sometimes have an impact that is outside the scope of what we can consider as a planning authority. It can be a very difficult role that we play when we are elected as elected members to represent people, but then we end up also in this statutory role as planning authority members, where whilst we hear the concerns of people, where those concerns, we have no discretion over those concerns under the planning law. We simply have to make decisions in accordance with what the planning law allows. And in this particular case, as we heard, the only discretion that we have in relation to this application are in relation to where concerns have been raised, or in relation to footpath and traffic generation. They are the only discretions really that we can consider in making this decision, and therefore we are really bound to support the application, and I am in support of the application for those reasons, playing that role that we have as a statutory planning authority. So fully empathise, but support the application. I do thank representatives and the owner for coming along this afternoon as well. Anything to close? Alderman King.
I think you've covered pretty well, except to agree with you. Thank everyone for coming in. There's a positive in more houses being built, but there's a difficulty for what local residents face, and we accept that completely. But this is the position we're in, so thank you again, and that's where we go.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Joyce, would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The application has been decided by the planning authority. The decision is to approve the application. The applicant will be notified of the decision and then has 14 days to appeal the decision. The representatives will also be notified of the decision and also have 14 days to appeal the decision. The use and development is not to commence until the end of the 14-day period.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you for coming along again. Moving on to item 6, report on representations to Archaeological Heritage Amendment, PLAM 2301 at 60 Creek Road, Newtown, 26 Cadbury Road and 36 Cadbury Road, Claremont. And our strategic planner, Darshini, will present this one to us. But I do note that we most definitely all have read our papers, so a brief presentation is suffice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick overcap. The proposed amendment was relating to Table C 6.4 places or precincts of archaeological potential. And the draft amendment was to add a new listing at 60 Creek Road, Newtown, and amend an existing listing at 26 and 36 Cadbury Road, Claremont. Figures 1 and 2 show the red areas that are the outline of the proposed potential archaeological values. Public exhibition was undertaken as per the requirements of LUPA. Adjoining landowners and occupiers were notified by writing to them. Two notices in the newspaper were issued as per the statutory requirements. As an additional measure, we put up site notices. This is not a statutory requirement. We did this so that we can inform the local community, especially in Cadbury Road, Claremont, as the site there does not have any adjoining properties. Adjoining is defined as properties that share a common boundary. There were 2 representations that were received during the public exhibition period. One representation from the public member and one notice of no objection from Taswater. The grounds raised in the representations were, one of it clearly indicated objection against the proposed amendment, and there were questions raised regarding the council officer's competency on archaeological knowledge. We prepared the proposed amendment and the supporting documentation with the input from the heritage officer, who is qualified in heritage, and the statement of archaeological potential was prepared by a heritage consultant who is also qualified and have experience in archaeological fields. There was no justification or evidence provided from the representative to show us any other information of the archaeological values being identified inaccurately. Therefore, the representation had no merit to warrant an amendment to the proposed planning scheme amendment. The next point was that was raised was about the notification, about the location and of the site notices and the wording on the site notices. As I mentioned previously, the site notices were not a statutory requirement for a planning scheme amendment under LUPA. We put them up as an additional measure. Nevertheless, the site notices are the same site notices that we put up for discretionary planning applications where there is a statutory obligation. And these are usually A4 sheets in a sleeve and attached to a stake. They were put up on public boundaries. The wording on the site notices just provide important information about lodging a representation. Therefore, again, this representation had no merit to warrant a change to the proposed amendment. There were several other matters that were raised that did not relate to the proposed planning scheme amendment. The project timeline, what next? So the GPA considers the merits of the representations today, and if endorsed, the planning scheme amendment will be submitted to the Planning Commission. The Commission will then undertake the assessment, consider representations and hold hearings, and then the Commission will make the final decision. In conclusion, the recommendation is that the GPA consider the merits of the representations and if satisfied, approve to provide the representation and the GPA report to the Planning Commission under Section 40K of LUPA.
Thank you, Darshini. Any questions? And I'll ask if we have someone to move the recommendation as a motion. Moved Alderman Dunsby, seconded Alderman Yaxley. Alderman Dunsby, any discussion?
Thank you. No, I believe that the report's very comprehensive and self-explanatory. I think that the response to the representation was appropriate. Thank you for it to go forward.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Happy for me to put the motion, Alderman Dunsby? I'll put the motion. Please raise your hand if you're for. It's carried unanimously. And Darshini has already explained the process from here, unless there's anything else to add. Okay, thank you. Sylvia, anything to add? Sylvia. Lyndall, sorry. Sylvia on my mind. No, okay. Moving on to item 7, Planning Scheme Amendment Request to amend the provisions of GLE P2, Particular Purpose Zone, Technopark, Properties in Innovation Drive and Longreach Avenue, Dowsing Point, and Lyndall is presenting this one to us. Again, we have read the papers, so a brief presentation is suffice. Go.
Okay, I was going to give an overview of the presentation, so just, but I want to be faster now. So basically, what I'm just going to talk about is the subject land, the draft amendment, how the amendment meets the statutory requirements. A key issue here is that we do have one property that didn't actually sign the owner's consent form, so I wanted to talk about that. And then just a quick slide, couple of slides about the amendment process and the recommendation. So the subject land, you would have seen your papers, it's the Technopark site, so it's basically that pink area. Now, the land is in a particular purpose zone. That's a zone that is part of our local provision schedule. It's not a state prepared zone. And it includes a number of properties, various owners, including council, and primarily the owners, or State Growth has a large number of properties in that area. So the next slide just talks about the proposed changes. So the request that we got from the applicant provided a number of changes. Council officers thought that they could have been improved. So we've actually spoken to the applicant about the changes that we feel are necessary to move the amendment forward, and the applicant was generally supportive of those changes. So what is put forward in the amendment documents is the changes that the applicants proposed and with some council modifications to those changes. So basically what they're seeking to do is really an enhancement of the provisions, generally looking to open up the what can occur on the site to enable some additional uses which may help enhance the site operating more as, with other opportunities for the techno park area, plus looking to how it can support the Prince of Wales Bay in general. All elected members would be aware that we do have a Prince of Wales Bay master plan, so that the amendment's actually consistent with that. So there's some new uses that are being proposed. We're also updating some of the existing standards and introducing a new standard which relates to discretionary uses, so that we do have some focus on discretionary uses on that site being there to support the techno park and a business park, but being other uses to be able to kind of come in and help support that. They don't actually have to be full-on R&D business processes as well. They can be supportive, provided they're kind of supporting the uses on that techno park site. And another key element is that there's going to be proposed to be an increase in the height in the acceptable solution. It's currently at 8 metres. We're comfortable in increasing that height to 12 metres. 12 metres is basically what the acceptable solution height is in a commercial zone, so it's kind of akin to that. So we think that's a reasonable increase. And the other changes are basically about making sure that the new provision is consistent with the writing style of the Tasmanian planning scheme provisions. So the next slide, just quickly run through the fact that it's actually meeting all the statutory requirements of the Act. So it meets local policy, in particular Council's strategic plan. With respect to state policies, there is one site, 33 Innovation Drive, that may have some level of contamination on that land. Because we're supporting the introduction of a sensitive use, the childcare centre, it would seem at odds with the whole, looking at the site as a whole, if we just took 33 Innovation Drive out of that amendment because of the sensitive use, or prohibited that sensitive use occurring on 33 Innovation Drive, because in the suite of zones in the planning scheme, we do have the potentially contaminated land code that can come in and make sure that any issues around contaminated land are addressed. So it might be that the childcare centre doesn't actually disturb the soil at all, or isn't in part of that building if there were any kind of contaminated issues on that site. So we're confident that the existing code in the scheme will pick up any land contamination issues. So in that regard, we're happy to include all of those properties as part of the planning scheme amendment, and we feel that the approach with having the code addresses that requirement under the now I've forgotten the term, but it addresses that requirement under the state provisions, which requires us to look at our land contamination. We also believe it's met the Southern Tasmania Regional Land Use Strategy and the Schedule 1 objectives. In particular, we do have to consider, because this is a local provision, that the land, that the planning scheme amendment has addressed section 32(4) of LUPA. So that can either be done by demonstrating that the use and development has significant economic values to the state, the region or the local area, or that under B, that the land in itself is particularly unique. The state government's role on that land, pushing it forward as a business hub, and the number of employees on that site, and the fact that our own strategic plan talks about promoting business, etc. on the area, and that we have the Prince of Wales master plan at a local level supports that requirement under the Act. So we believe that it will actually meet section 32(4)(a) to facilitate something that provides for a significant economic role at the state, regional and a local level. So we think it's met that requirement. So in this regard, believe that the planning scheme amendment has met all of the statutory tests. The final issue that I wanted to talk through was in respect to the landowner consent for 31 Innovation Drive. This is an applicant-led planning scheme amendment request. So the requirement there is that all the properties involved in the planning scheme amendment have signed off on a form and have given owner's consent. So when this application was lodged in October 22, the state growth and JMG Engineering had got permission from everyone except for 31 Innovation Drive. Now they said it's not that they said no to the amendment, it's that they didn't sign the form. So State Growth tried on 3 occasions to contact that property owner and get them to sign that form. We felt at that point in time that given that the amendment was basically kind of broadening the range of uses, not actually removing abilities to operate on the site, that it was providing a level of clarity, and that leaving out 31 Innovation Drive from the amendment would basically leave a gap in the control, that we were comfortable as council officers to recommend that the GPA of your own motion consider including 31 Innovation Drive as part of the planning scheme amendment. You have that ability to do that under the legislation. So when we were finalising the report, we went back and I went back and had then double checked on, to make sure we had all the owners' consent and that other people's property owners hadn't changed, and we realised that 31 Innovation Drive had changed ownership on the 22nd of September, which is about the time that the state growth area was actually seeking consent. So that may be why that hasn't happened. We've asked State Growth to try again to contact the landowner, and they have tried that, but they haven't managed to get anything to us in the time frame for this report. Still of the position, based on the amendment, it's not actually taking away rights, it's actually providing opportunity. The strategic implications of leaving one site out, and that all the landowners were notified of this meeting and all have that opportunity to make a representation. We feel that the planning authority can choose with of its own motion to include that property as part of the planning scheme amendment. So Dashini stepped through the process in the previous report. So we're right at the beginning. So if the GPA chooses to prepare the amendment, it would go on exhibition for 28 days. So the final report is just outlines the recommendations. So we're recommending that the GPA prepare the amendment and include 31 Innovation Drive to certify the amendment and place the amendment on exhibition for a period of 28 days.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Pretty informative.
Alderman Yaxie?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, just a question just regarding 2 things. The current owner of 31 Innovation is who? Is that
Times, this is in the report.
sorry?
Times.
Herald Weekly Times, which is effectively owned by News Limited?
Yes, Herald, yes, thank you, yes.
Yep. And so what's the time frame in terms of getting, my question is in terms of just making sure that we've covered all our bases and in So what timeframe have we given them to get back to us?
So I asked the applicant 2 weeks ago to start that process up
Yeah.
and write to them.
Yeah.
They've written to them, but we haven't heard anything back from them. So realistically, we could, if they lodge a representation or they came back and they're particularly unhappy, when we go to the next meeting, so if it's chosen to be prepared, and then we get representations, or we could have a meeting and you could determine to actually remove that property from the amendment if you didn't want to
Right. Yep.
look at that.
Yep.
That might actually impact how the amendment goes. They may, in that time frame, be able to provide us with the written consent, which we can give to the Tasmanian Planning Commission.
Yep. And are there any ramifications of that? So if we proceed with the adding them into the part of it, there's nothing that can come back to, there's no fallout from doing that?
Well, I guess what you're doing is the GPA of its own motion is making that decision to include that property. So what the argument as to why that would be an appropriate choice is what I've outlined, that we think it's really opening up the amendment. It would be odd not to include that property given the large area, that the applicant has tried on a number of occasions initially when they lodged to try and get in touch with the owners, but that hasn't happened. There's always going to be a risk of repercussions. It could be that they put in a representation and say they don't like
To be part of it.
to be part of that.
Yep.
As with any amendment, say for instance, we were looking at a heritage control, for the Shini's example, we might say that we would still proceed because we think it's warranted to include that property, even though they don't want to be part of that amendment, and have that control be considered through that process.
That's fine.
It's only the very first start of the
Yeah.
process, so we've still got plenty of time to.
No, that's right. I just wanted to double check.
Any
All good, thank you.
questions? Have someone to move the recommendation as a motion. Thank you, Alderman Yaxley. Someone to second, Alderman Cockshaw. Any discussion, Alderman Yax?
Not overly, just a comment in terms of obviously an extensive amount of research. Well done. It would be to try and get all that, and the report was very detailed, and appreciate all that effort and work. It's great. So I guess for me, the site is obviously an important piece of a bigger puzzle. So the entire area now and moving forward. So positioning the Techno part as the destination for research and development is a positive thing for our area and for our city to continue to grow and prosper. So I'm more than happy to put it out there.
Great,
The
thank you.
recommendation. Thank you.
Any further discussion? No? Happy for me to put the motion to the vote? I'll put the motion. Please raise your hand if you're for. Carried unanimously. And as we had previously, the process from here. So thank you. That brings our meeting to a close at 4:43 p.m. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us here in chambers. Thank you to our planning officers. Thank you to my fellow planning authority members. And thanks to those who have joined us online. We will see you again soon.